So when I was a kid, there was a movie called The Karate Kid that I really did enjoy, that I caught on TV, and later on, when I was older and had a DVD player, I got The Karate Kid on DVD and later on Blu-ray after that. But one of the things that me as a Karate Kid fan never really got into when it was first airing was Cobra Kai. And yes, a lot of people told me to watch Cobra Kai. You know who you are. And I mean a lot of people. They were basically telling me, like, look, this is not just a continuation of The Karate Kid. This is like sort of a modern, very smart look at what could have happened to these characters years after those movies. Now, for a long time I neglected it, but a couple of years ago, a buddy of mine insisted that I watch the first few episodes, and I did, and I liked what I saw. And I was very interested in what I saw. However, I didn't jump all the way in, really because other things kind of took over my space. My issue is that, and this is something I'm very aware of, when it comes to TV, it's a lot harder than movies. Stuff like Star Wars and some of the Marvel shows, and definitely X-Men 97, like stuff like that are, in many ways, rarities for me. It's hard for me to really dive into new shows. It's hard for me to dive into like new TV shows, or at least, even if they're not brand new, shows I've never watched before. New to me. But with Cobra Kai coming to an end very soon, season 6 I believe is the final season coming out later this year, I'm going to start going back and watching all of it, starting with season 1, which is what this video is about. Cobra Kai, season 1, my thoughts. First time seeing it. I know I'm late. You don't have to tell me. And I'm trying to catch up before season 6 begins, because there is a new Karate Kid movie coming out in 2025 that is going to continue the story with Ralph Macchio after Cobra Kai. So my initial impressions going into the show was, besides hearing all the hype, look, doing a soft reboot slash modern continuation of an old series of movies or television can oftentimes not work. We've seen this not work many times, in fact. Other times it has worked. It all comes down to the writing and the producing and the performances. And what I found interesting about the creators of this show is that they all come from a background of comedy. And while Cobra Kai does have a ton of comedy, which is why a big reason as to why I like the show in season 1, it's way more than that. So this story is decades after the original Karate Kid story, but the main character is not Ralph Macchio, which I think would have probably, or Daniel LaRusso, played by Ralph Macchio. I think that would have been sort of the, I guess you can say, the logical direction that many people would assume, okay, let's pick up what his life is at. No, that's a secondary story, at least at first. Really, the main character, the main centerpiece, is Johnny Lawrence, once again being reprised by William Zabka. And, you know, on paper, it's like, okay, well, Johnny was an asshole. Let's be real. Johnny was a prick to Daniel LaRusso in those old movies. So, for the story to try to make him a sympathetic character, I wonder what they were going to do. Now, obviously, one of the big themes of this first season is how time can change you and how your experiences can change you. Unfortunately, the one thing that kind of looms over the head of this show, at least in the early, in my early viewings, was the fact that Pat Morita is no longer with us, Mr. Miyagi. Now, they did not try to recast him. They did not use some kind of technology to, or say he's away and just have him on the phone or something like that. No, in universe, Mr. Miyagi's no longer with us either. And that actually becomes a big crutch of the story of Daniel LaRusso. But what I was not expecting is how they would show different aspects of Daniel's character based on the events that happened in the Karate Kid. So what's interesting about this show is it's about Johnny, it's about Daniel, and it's about their families. And they're the two centerpiece characters, but there are other main characters. Like, for example, the early students of Cobra Kai. They're not the centerpiece that connects us to the original show, but they're important characters. Same thing with Daniel's wife and children. It's sort of like they grew up, now they've got kids, and they've got their own problems. But what I was not expecting was just how well written it would end up being as far as coming up with a really smart premise. Now, if you haven't seen the show, I'm going to go into spoilers. I have not seen season 2 yet or anything past that, so I will only be discussing my thoughts on season 1. I'm going to start season 2 probably either tomorrow or in a couple days. So what's happened is Daniel's torment at the hands of Cobra Kai sort of created this weird PTSD. At this point, he's married, he's got kids, he's no longer practicing karate. Instead, he is a car salesman, very successful, and his face is everywhere, and Johnny has to see that. Now, Johnny's obviously still feeling like a failure based on what happened in the first Karate Kid film. And so he has to see what a success Daniel has become. And even though he's not bitter about it, he's definitely, well, that's not true. He's a little bit bitter, but he's at least annoyed. But I would say there's a couple things that happen that where he's like the whole drawing the dick on his mouth definitely is him being just a child. That's him regressing back to, him being an immature teen. But at the same time, he's also going through a lot, as you find out as the series goes on. He's got major bouts with depression. He's got alcoholism issues. He doesn't really have a strong social circle. He's been through a divorce and he has his own kid. And there's a lot of complexities there. And then with Daniel, as fate should have it, Daniel, a lot of this show is one of those small world type of shows where, yes, there are some things about the show that are a little too coincidental. You know what I mean? For example, the fact that Daniel's daughter's boyfriend is the first major student of Cobra Kai, of the new Cobra Kai that Johnny started. There's that whole thing, and then the fact that Johnny's son becomes Daniel's student. So there's a lot of cross-pollination between the two, which of course is going to steer their pathways, in the future in different directions. But the idea that these two guys have been so affected and they both tried to move on, not just from their interactions and their rivalry back in the first film, but what's happened to them since then. The issues they've had. Daniel dealing with Miyagi's passing. Johnny dealing with the psychological scarring that not only losing to Daniel caused, but also what Cobra Kai did to him from John Kreese, who was obviously the old master from the first film of Cobra Kai. And what I also thought was interesting was Daniel himself and Johnny both share some similarities, but despite, of course, being martial artists and having that history, they've got to deal with their own relationships with their kids, because Daniel and his kids don't really see eye to eye a lot. And you can tell he's trying to be in their lives, but he's also trying to juggle work, and there's a lot to it. And yes, there is a lot of comedy, and it's my kind of comedy. Some of the comedy's just a lot of slapstick and stuff like that, but some of it's pretty thought-provoking. For example, near the, I want to say the second half of the season, when Cobra Kai begins to open up a lot more, and I enjoyed the struggles of the school first starting out, and then Daniel does some really shady things. The dark side of Daniel LaRusso is shown here. This is a very different man than the kid from the old movie, because he tries to do some real shady stuff to Johnny that, and they still, they show another side of Daniel, which I thought was really, really ballsy. That was really, really ballsy. So Johnny and Daniel have that going on. And what I was going to say is there's a scene in this show where Johnny is going off on how this generation of kids are soft and, keyboard warriors. And let me tell you, if you know anything about the last 9 years of my life, Johnny is my spirit animal. The things that he says, I don't agree with everything he says. He's obviously a fictional character, but there are some things, and he's obviously a knucklehead. He's got his own issues. He can be kind of a prick, but there are some things he says that resonates, because even though I was not a teenager in the 80s, I was a teenager in the late 90s, early 2000s, and times have changed. Times have changed. The internet age, and this show addresses technology compared to the 80s too. The internet age has really changed a lot of people and how things were resolved and how we dealt with conflict. Big time. Some parts of this show are pulled right out of 80s cheese. You know what I mean? And some parts bring it into the modern era, but with a very satirical and really smart viewpoint. The writing, I thought, was great, because it wasn't sophisticated to where it was confusing or you get lost. It's very easy to understand, but more so in developing characters that have layers. This is something the Acolyte is kind of missing out on here. Although they're trying with a couple characters, it's not quite the same as this show, where there's something to like about most of the characters, and there's something to dislike even about the ones you want to root for. And that's human beings. There are people out there who are good people. There's people who are bad people. There are also good people who do bad things and bad people who do good things. And this show, I think, really, really, really hammers that home, because even though Johnny is messed up over Kreese's treatment of him back in the day, he still, like, that treatment kind of toughened him up. So he brings that into Cobra Kai, and it really kind of puts a smile on my face, because some of it's too much, some of it isn't. It's funny because this show was first a YouTube premium show, back when it was called YouTube Red, which they changed because it sounds too much like RedTube, and I'm not going to ask you to Google RedTube. Let's just say, if you don't know what RedTube is, let's just say it's not safe for work. But they were bought out by Netflix, who, not YouTube, but I mean Cobra Kai. They got the rights away, and so now it's a Netflix show. But I do regret not watching it earlier, because I had a great time watching it. It had me in. The episodes, they don't drag on. It's very well edited, and they also bring back some of the original Karate Kid music, which I totally adored. There are so many properties that I want to get this treatment, except I don't trust most of Hollywood to do it because of what Hollywood has become. This is a show that actually does the soft reboot, actually brings in something from the past while making it new, still with a little bit of nostalgia, like the music I mentioned and the discussions about the past and the characters, but still is smart enough to keep people engaged. I cannot wait for season 2 to watch it. Those are my thoughts on Cobra Kai season 1. Let me know in the comments what your favorite moment was from season 1, and I'll catch y'all soon.